In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that every sentient species whispers in the dark corners of their homeworlds. Never wake a sleeping human. I am Commander Zethkar of the Valerian High Fleet, veteran of 47 campaigns across the Andromeda Spiral. I have seen the crystalline warriors of Nexus Prime shatter mountains with their songs. I have watched the shadow dancers of the Void Realm phase through solid matter to strike at their enemies' hearts. I have witnessed the biomechanical horrors of the swarm consume entire star systems in their endless hunger. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I saw when humanity went to war. They call it the human doctrine now, studied in every military academy from the core worlds to the outer rim. Scholars debate its origins, strategists attempt to replicate its effectiveness, and politicians use it to justify their most desperate decisions. But they all miss the point. They focus on the tactics, the technology, the calculated madness of human warfare. They don't understand that when humans charge into battle, they're not just fighting for victory. They're not fighting for territory, or resources, or political advantage. When humans go to war, they're fighting for something far more dangerous than any weapon ever forged. They're fighting for each other. This is the story of how I learned why the universe fears them. This is the story of the day I watched a single human battalion turn the tide of an interstellar war. This is the story of why, when the darkness comes calling, every species in the galaxy secretly hopes the humans will answer. Because when humanity charges into battle, they don't just bring death, they bring hope. The crimson warning lights of the bridge cast everything in the color of blood, which seemed fitting given what had just happened to the Valerian Third Fleet. Commander Zethkar stood rigid before the tactical display, his forearms trembling with barely contained rage as he watched the last of his ships fall back in disarray. The crystalline formations of his homeworld's military doctrine lay shattered across the void, beautiful geometric patterns, now reduced to chaotic clusters of damaged vessels limping toward the safety of the outer system. "Status report," Zethkar commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked him as a member of the military caste. The bridge crew, a mix of Valerian officers and allied species, worked frantically at their stations. The air recyclers struggled to filter out the acrid smoke that had been seeping from damaged systems for the past 3 hours. Sub-Commander Veltai, his primary tactical officer, activated the holographic display with a gesture of her secondary arms. The battlefield materialized before them in sickening detail. 37 ships lost, Commander. 18 more with critical damage. The hegemony forces have withdrawn to the inner system, but our forward scouts report massive reinforcement fleets incoming from 3 different vectors. The hegemony. Just thinking the name made Zethkar's skin plates shift color to deep purple, a sure sign of Valerian distress. They had appeared seemingly overnight, conquering system after system with a ruthless efficiency that had caught the entire galaxy off guard. No one knew where they came from, only that they consumed everything in their path. Worlds that had stood for millennia were reduced to ash in a matter of days. Entire civilizations simply vanished, their cultures and histories erased as if they had never existed. What made them truly terrifying wasn't just their advanced technology or their seemingly infinite numbers. It was their complete and utter disregard for any form of diplomacy or negotiation. The hegemony didn't conquer for resources or territory. They conquered for the sake of conquest itself, driven by an incomprehensible desire to remake the universe in their own image.
"And our allies?" Zethkar asked, though he already knew the answer from the grim expressions around him.
The Nexus Prime fleet broke formation after losing their flagship, Veltai reported, her voice carefully neutral.
The Void Realm dancers have retreated to the Shadow Dimensions. The Krexar bioships are regrouping near the 7th planet, but their hive mind is reporting severe trauma from the psychic attacks. Zethkar closed his primary eyes, relying on his secondary vision to continue monitoring the tactical display. The Galactic Coalition had taken the worst beating in its history, and they hadn't even faced the main hegemony force. Intelligence suggested that what they had encountered was merely a scouting fleet, testing their defenses and capabilities. The coalition had been formed in desperation, bringing together 12 different species in an unprecedented alliance. Each brought their own unique advantages to the table. The Valerians contributed their mathematical precision and crystalline technology. The Nexus Prime provided their reality-shaping abilities and near-indestructible warriors. The Void Realm species offered stealth capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. The Krexar brought overwhelming numbers and biological adaptability. And yet, they had been utterly outmatched. "Sir," Communications Officer Thys spoke up, her reptilian features tense with concentration. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition High Command." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered features of Admiral Korath, a Nexus Prime veteran whose crystal-enhanced body showed the scars of a dozen major campaigns. Behind him, Zethkar could see the chaos of the Coalition's mobile command center, with officers from various species working frantically to coordinate the remains of their forces. "Commander Zethkar." Korath's voice carried the weight of exhaustion and desperation. "I'm transmitting new coordinates. We're falling back to the Arcturus system for regrouping. Intelligence suggests the Hegemony's main fleet won't arrive for another 72 hours. We need to use that time to reassess our strategy."
"With respect, Admiral," Zethkar replied, his harmonics carrying a note of frustration. "Our current strategy appears to be get slaughtered with maximum efficiency."
The enemy's technology is beyond anything we've encountered.
"Their shields absorb our energy weapons, their hulls deflect our projectiles, and their tactical coordination is flawless. We need a completely new approach." Korath's crystalline features shifted in what might have been agreement or resignation. "That's exactly what we're hoping to discuss. There have been some developments regarding potential new allies, species that haven't been involved in the conflict thus far." Something in the Admiral's tone made Zethkar's auditory organs twitch with curiosity. "What kind of species are we talking about?" "The kind that other species prefer not to discuss in polite company," Korath replied cryptically. "Report to the command station as soon as possible. We'll brief you on the situation there." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, watching the red icons that represented hegemony forces slowly advancing through the system. Behind them, sensor readings showed massive energy signatures that could only be the reinforcement fleets Korath had mentioned. "Set course for the Arcturus system," he ordered. "Maximum burn. And send word to all ships to maintain formation. We've been bloodied, but we're not broken." As the remaining ships of the Third Fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives, Zethkar couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. The war had been going badly from the start, but there had always been hope that their combined technologies and tactics would eventually prove superior to brute force. That hope was fading fast. The journey to Arcturus took 18 hours, during which time reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy. The hegemony advance seemed unstoppable. The Meridian colonies had fallen silent. The ancient fortress worlds of the Keltar Empire were under siege. Even the supposedly impregnable core systems were reporting massive hegemony fleets massing at their borders. When the coalition fleet finally arrived at Arcturus, Zethkar was struck by how depleted their forces had become. What had once been a proud armada of over 3,000 vessels from 12 different species was now reduced to fewer than 800 ships, many of them showing visible battle damage. The command station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, a massive structure that combined the architectural styles and technologies of all coalition members. Crystalline spires from Valerian design rose alongside the flowing organic curves favored by the Krexhar, while Void Realm Shadow Tech created areas of controlled dimensional instability for their representatives. Zethkar's shuttle docked at one of the Valerian-designated ports, and he made his way through corridors filled with a tension so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Officers from various species moved with purpose, but there was an underlying current of desperation in their movements. Everyone knew they were losing the war. The main briefing chamber was designed to accommodate the varied physiological needs of all coalition species. Zethkar took his position at the Valerian section, where the crystalline resonance field helped calm his frayed nerves. Around him, representatives from the other species gathered in their own environmental zones. Admiral Korath called the meeting to order with a harmonic tone that carried across all frequency ranges. "Fellow commanders, the situation is critical. Our conventional approaches have proven inadequate against hegemony technology and tactics. Our combined fleets, representing the best of 12 distinct military traditions, have been systematically dismantled." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the current galactic situation. Red zones representing hegemony control covered nearly a third of known space, with expanding tendrils reaching toward the coalition's remaining strongholds. However, Korath continued, "Our intelligence services have identified a potential ally, a species that has remained neutral in the conflict thus far, but which possesses certain characteristics that might prove useful." The display shifted, showing a small section of the galaxy that Zethkar didn't immediately recognize. It was located in what most species considered the galactic backwater, a region of young stars and primitive civilizations. The species in question calls itself humanity, Korath explained. They're a relatively new addition to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only about 200 years ago. By most metrics, they should be completely irrelevant to our current situation. Sub-Admiral Vexhai, representing the Void Realm contingent, materialized from the shadows with typical dramatic flair. Then why are we wasting time discussing them? We need proven allies with advanced technology and established military doctrine. Korath's features shifted in what Zethkar recognized as the Nexus Prime equivalent of a grim smile, because humanity has something that none of us possess, something that might be exactly what we need to fight the hegemony. And what would that be? Asked General Folkvar of the Krexhar, his massive bioform looming over the gathering. They're completely insane, Korath replied simply. The briefing chamber fell into stunned silence. Zethkar felt his skin plate shift through several different colors as he processed this information. I'm sorry, Admiral, but did you just suggest we ally with an insane species? Not clinically insane, Korath clarified, activating additional displays that showed various human conflicts throughout their recorded history. But their approach to warfare is so fundamentally different from anything we've encountered that it might be exactly what we need. Every other coalition species approaches conflict with logic, strategy, and self-preservation as primary concerns. Humans appear to approach war with what can only be described as controlled madness. The displays showed images that made even veteran military officers uncomfortable. Humans charging across open ground into devastating enemy fire. Humans fighting in conditions that would kill most other species. Humans continuing to fight even when victory was mathematically impossible. Look at this data, Korath continued, highlighting specific examples. During their own planetary conflicts, humans have repeatedly achieved victory against superior numbers and technology through tactics that no sane species would attempt. They fight when they should retreat. They attack when they should defend. They sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and freedom that most species consider secondary to survival. Zethkar studied the data with growing fascination and horror. This is irrational behavior. No logical military doctrine could incorporate such unpredictable elements. Exactly. Korath agreed. The hegemony's greatest strength is their ability to predict and counter our tactical approaches. They've studied our military histories, our cultural tendencies, our logical decision-making processes. They know how we think, how we plan, how we react under pressure. The implications began to dawn on the assembled commanders. General Folkvar was the first to voice what they were all thinking. You're suggesting that human unpredictability might disrupt hegemony tactical calculations. I'm suggesting that human insanity might be the only thing capable of surprising an enemy that has learned to counter sanity. Korath replied, Our intelligence indicates that the hegemony has had minimal contact with humanity. They're essentially an unknown quantity. Admiral Seklon of the Meridian Navy, one of the few survivors from that fallen civilization, activated her own display. I've reviewed the available data on human military capabilities. Their technology is primitive by our standards. Their ships are crude, their weapons are inefficient, and their armor is barely adequate. But their tactics, she continued with what sounded like reluctant admiration, their tactics are completely unprecedented. They employ strategies that no other species would consider because they involve unacceptable casualty rates. They use their own ships as weapons. They fight in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They coordinate attacks that require split-second timing across vast distances. Zethkar found himself both intrigued and disturbed by what he was learning. Have we made contact with them? Preliminary contact has been established, Korath confirmed. Their response was, Interesting. When we explained the threat posed by the hegemony and requested military assistance, they didn't ask about compensation or territorial concessions. They didn't demand strategic information or technological exchanges. What did they ask for? Veltai inquired. Korath's features shifted again, this time expressing something that might have been bewilderment. They asked how many coalition civilians were at risk. When we provided casualty estimates, they immediately agreed to provide military support. No negotiations, no conditions, no demands for anything in return. The briefing chamber erupted in confused discussion as representatives from various species tried to process this information. Zethkar's own thoughts were spinning. A species that would commit to military action without negotiating for advantage? It was unprecedented in galactic history. There has to be more to it, insisted Commander Helix of the Kaltar Empire. No species acts purely from altruistic motives. What's their real agenda? That's what makes them so potentially valuable, Korath replied. According to our diplomatic team, humans appear to have a psychological compulsion to protect what they consider innocent life. They've committed to sending a full battle group to assist with our next engagement, a battle group of primitive ships with crude weapons. Sub-Admiral Vexehai pointed out. How exactly is this supposed to help us against hegemony technology? Before Korath could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the command station. Emergency lights bathed the briefing chamber in pulsing red illumination as the tactical displays automatically updated to show new information. Report! Korath commanded. A communications officer's voice crackled through the intercom system. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. The hegemony main fleet has arrived early. Estimated arrival time, 14 hours. The displays showed a sight that made even the most veteran commanders feel cold terror. Thousands of hegemony vessels were emerging from faster-than-light travel, their dark forms creating an advancing wall of destruction that would reach the coalition forces before any significant reinforcements could arrive. How many ships? Asked General Thokva. Preliminary count suggests over 4,000 vessels, including at least 12 of their Planet Killer-class dreadnoughts. Zethkar felt his skin plate shift to deep purple again. The coalition's remaining forces would be outnumbered more than 5 to 1, and that was assuming all their damaged ships could even participate in combat. Sir, the communications officer continued, we're also detecting another fleet signature incoming from the opposite vector. Unknown configuration, but the energy signatures don't match any known hegemony technology. Admiral Korath's crystalline features brightened slightly. Time to arrival? 6 hours, sir. Much faster than the hegemony fleet. Zavka realized what this meant.
The humans?
It would appear so, Korath confirmed. It seems we're about to get our first real look at humanity's approach to warfare. As the coalition forces began their desperate preparations for what might be their final battle, Zethkar found himself wondering exactly what kind of species they had just invited to join the war. Everything he had heard about humans suggested that they were either the galaxy's greatest fools or its most dangerous warriors. In less than 6 hours, he would find out which. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel with an energy signature that made every sensor on the coalition command station scream in protest. Zethkar watched from the observation deck as the unknown vessels materialized against the starfield, and his first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake. These couldn't be military vessels. The ships were angular, brutish things that looked like they had been assembled in a scrapyard rather than constructed in proper shipyards. Where coalition vessels followed elegant curves and mathematical precision, the human ships were all harsh edges and exposed weaponry. They bristled with gun turrets, missile pods, and sensor arrays that seemed to have been bolted on as afterthoughts. Instead of the smooth, polished hulls that every civilized species preferred, the human vessels were covered in armor plating that looked like it had been welded together by someone who cared more about function than form. They looked like they were built for war and nothing else, observed Veltai, who had joined him at the observation port. Zethkar had to agree. Where other species designed ships that could serve multiple purposes? Exploration, diplomacy, trade, defense. These human vessels had clearly been constructed with a single purpose in mind. They were weapons platforms, pure and simple, designed to carry as much destructive capability as possible into combat zones. Incoming transmission from the human fleet, announced the communications officer over the intercom. They're requesting permission to coordinate with our tactical command. Put them through, Admiral Korath's voice replied from the command center. The main display activated, and Zethkar got his first look at a human being. The creature that appeared on screen was bipedal, like most sentient species, but there was something unsettling about its features. The eyes were forward-facing, like a predator's, and they held an intensity that made Zethkar's skin plates shift nervously. The human skin was pale, almost translucent, and its hair was a strange reddish-brown color that seemed to move independently. Admiral Korath, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, the human said, its voice carrying tones that Zethkar found both musical and somehow threatening. We've reviewed the tactical situation and are prepared to coordinate our operations with your forces. Korath's crystalline features shifted into what Zethkar recognized as polite confusion. Admiral Chen, we appreciate your rapid response, but I should point out that you're facing a hegemony fleet of over 4,000 vessels. Your battle group appears to consist of fewer than 200 ships. Perhaps you should consider a support role rather than direct engagement. The human's features changed in a way that Zethkar found disturbing. Its mouth curved upward, revealing white teeth that looked remarkably sharp. He realized this might be what humans called a smile, though it looked more like a threat display to him. Admiral, we appreciate the concern, but we didn't come here to hide behind your fleet, Chen replied. We came here to fight. The hegemony has been slaughtering civilian populations across the galaxy. That ends today. Admiral Chen, Korath said carefully, I don't think you understand the nature of what we're facing. The hegemony uses adaptive technology that learns from our tactics and counters them. Their ships can absorb energy weapons, and their shields can deflect most projectile attacks. Their coordination is perfect, and their strategic planning is flawless. Every engagement we've had with them has resulted in massive casualties for minimal gains. The human's smile widened, showing even more of those disturbing teeth. That's because you've been fighting them like civilized beings. Sometimes, Admiral, civilized doesn't get the job done. Before Korath could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout the station. The hegemony fleet had accelerated their approach and would arrive in less than 2 hours. We'll take point position, Admiral Chen announced. Deploy your forces behind us in a defensive formation. When the shooting starts, follow our lead and try to keep up. The transmission ended, leaving the Coalition command in stunned silence. Zethkar hurried from the observation deck to the tactical center, where he found the assembled commanders staring at their displays in various states of bewilderment and concern. Did she just tell us to follow their lead? Asked Sub-Admiral Vexhai. A species that achieved spaceflight 200 years ago is going to take point against the most advanced military force in galactic history, added General Thakvar, his massive form shifting in what Zethkar recognized as agitation. Admiral Korath was studying the tactical display with intense concentration. The human ships had arranged themselves in what appeared to be a completely random formation, with no discernible pattern or strategic logic. Some vessels were clustered together while others were spread across vast distances. There was no apparent command structure or organized battle line. This makes no sense, muttered Commander Helix. They're violating every principle of coordinated fleet action. Their formation has no tactical coherence whatsoever. Maybe that's the point, Zethkar found himself saying. All eyes turned to him, and he felt his skin plate shift to a deeper blue as he continued. We've been assuming that the hegemony's advantage comes from their ability to predict and counter our tactics. What if the human approach is to be completely unpredictable? Chaos isn't strategy, objected Admiral Seklon. Random actions don't win battles. Unless your enemy's greatest strength is their ability to plan against organized opposition, Zethkar replied, his thoughts racing as he studied the human formation. Look at how they're positioned. It's not random, it's chaotic. There's a difference. Random implies lack of purpose. Chaos implies purpose that can't be easily understood or predicted. Before anyone could respond, the long-range sensors detected the arrival of the hegemony fleet. The enemy vessels emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their dark hulls arranged in geometric patterns that spoke of mathematical precision and coordinated planning. They began advancing toward the Coalition position with the inexorable purpose of a natural disaster. All ships, battle stations, Admiral Korath commanded. Implement defensive formation pattern 7. All weapon systems online. Zethkar returned to his ship as quickly as possible, arriving on the bridge just as his crew finished the final preparations for combat. The main tactical display showed the approaching hegemony force in terrifying detail. Over 4,000 vessels ranging from small patrol craft to massive dreadnoughts that were larger than most Coalition space stations. Human ships are accelerating toward the enemy fleet, reported Veltai from her tactical station. Their energy signatures are spiking across all frequency ranges. Zethkar watched in fascination as the human battle groups surged forward, their chaotic formation somehow managing to maintain coherence despite its apparent randomness. As they approached the hegemony fleet, something extraordinary happened. The human ships opened fire, but they didn't use energy weapons or conventional projectiles. Instead, they launched what appeared to be their own smaller vessels toward the enemy fleet. Zethkar realized with growing horror that these weren't missiles or drones. They were crude fighter craft with actual human beings inside them. They're launching suicide attacks, breathed Veltai, her voice filled with disbelief. No, Zethkar corrected, studying the sensor data more carefully. Look at the flight patterns. Those fighters are maneuvering with too much precision for suicide runs. They're doing something else. The human fighters weaved through the hegemony formation with an agility that seemed to defy physics. They were moving in 3 dimensions simultaneously, using micro-jumps through space-time that created constantly shifting attack vectors. The hegemony vessels, designed to track and target conventional attack patterns, seemed unable to lock onto the erratically moving fighters. Then the fighters began attacking, but instead of targeting the obvious weak points that any sensible military doctrine would focus on, weapon systems, engines, command structures, the human pilots were attacking completely random sections of the hegemony ships. They hit armor plating with no strategic value, damaged sensor arrays that weren't crucial to ship function, and destroyed exterior components that seemed to serve no important purpose. "What are they doing?" demanded Communications Officer Thiss. "They're wasting their attacks on meaningless targets." Zethkar watched the battle unfold with growing understanding. "They're not trying to destroy the ships. They're trying to confuse them. Look at how the hegemony vessels are responding." The enemy fleet, which had maintained perfect formation and coordination throughout every previous engagement, was beginning to show signs of disorder. Individual ships were breaking formation to pursue the human fighters, disrupting the geometric patterns that gave the hegemony their tactical advantage. Ships that tried to maintain position were being attacked by fighters that appeared seemingly from nowhere, using attack vectors that changed faster than the hegemony targeting systems could adapt. "Impossible," muttered Veltai. "The hegemony never breaks formation. Their coordination is absolute." But they were breaking formation. The perfect mathematical precision that had made them nearly invincible was being undone by what could only be described as organized chaos. The human fighters were creating so many unpredictable variables that the hegemony's tactical computers couldn't process them fast enough to mount an effective response. Then the main human fleet arrived. The larger human vessels opened fire with weapons that Zethkar had never seen before. Instead of energy beams or projectile weapons, they launched what appeared to be chunks of solid matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles punched through hegemony shields as if they didn't exist, causing massive structural damage to ships that had previously been considered nearly indestructible. "Kinetic weapons," realized Veltai. "They're using pure kinetic energy instead of conventional weapon systems." "That's barbaric," protested Thiss. "Kinetic weapons cause massive collateral damage and are impossible to control precisely." "Which is exactly why they work," Zethkar said, his admiration for human tactical thinking growing by the minute. "The hegemony's defensive systems are designed to counter energy weapons and conventional projectiles. They're not prepared for crude kinetic impacts." The battle was becoming increasingly chaotic as more human ships joined the engagement. They were using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Ships were ramming each other. Fighters were performing maneuvers that should have killed their pilots from the gravitational forces involved. Larger vessels were using their own hulls as weapons, deliberately sustaining massive damage to inflict even greater damage on enemy ships. "Sir," called out Navigation Officer Kess from his station, "the human admiral is requesting that we advance to support their attack." Zethkar looked at the tactical display, where the human fleet was engaged in what could only be described as controlled insanity. Ships were exploding on both sides, but the hegemony formation was completely broken now. Their vessels scattered across the battlefield in disorganized clusters. "All ships advance," Admiral Korath's voice came over the communication system. "Support the human attack. Target hegemony vessels that are isolated from their formation." As the coalition fleet moved forward, Zethkar got his first close look at human ships in actual combat. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about space warfare. Human vessels were continuing to fight even after sustaining damage that should have destroyed them. Ships with massive hull breaches were still firing their weapons. Vessels that had lost primary power were using emergency systems to ram enemy ships. One human destroyer passed close enough to Zethkar's ship for him to see through its transparent steel windows. What he saw inside made his skin plate shift through every color in the spectrum. The human crew was still at their stations, despite the fact that their ship was obviously dying. Fires were burning in the corridors. The artificial gravity had failed. An atmosphere was venting into space through multiple hull breaches. But the humans were still fighting. They were strapped into their positions, some of them clearly injured, operating their weapons and systems with a determination that bordered on the supernatural. One human was manually loading ammunition into a gun turret while floating in zero gravity, his movements precise and efficient despite the chaos around him. "They're not retreating," Veltai observed, her voice filled with something that might have been awe. "Even their damaged ships are continuing the attack." The battle raged for 3 hours, and by the end of it, the hegemony fleet had been completely routed. Over half their vessels had been destroyed or disabled, while the rest had retreated in disarray. The coalition had lost fewer than 100 ships, while the human fleet had been reduced to less than half its original size. But they had won. As the last hegemony vessels disappeared into faster-than-light travel, Zethkar found himself staring at the aftermath of the battle with a mixture of horror and admiration. The humans had achieved something that every coalition military strategist had considered impossible. They had not only defeated a superior hegemony force, but they had done it while suffering acceptable casualties. How? He asked out loud, not really expecting an answer. Because they fight like they're already dead, came Veltai's quiet response. They don't fight to survive. They fight to win, regardless of the cost to themselves. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen again, and Zethkar was shocked to see that she was injured. Blood was running down the side of her head, and her uniform was torn and scorched. Behind her, he could see human crew members working to repair their ship with the same single-minded determination they had shown in combat. Admiral Korath, she said, her voice steady despite her obvious injuries, the immediate threat has been neutralized, but this was just a scouting force. Intelligence suggests the main hegemony fleet will arrive within 48 hours. How many ships are you estimating? Korath asked. Chen's smile returned, and this time Zethka realized it wasn't a threat display at all. It was an expression of anticipation. Approximately 20,000 vessels, including their command dreadnoughts. The number hit the coalition commanders like a physical blow. 20,000 ships was more than the entire coalition could field, even at full strength. We'll need to coordinate a strategic withdrawal, Korath said. Fall back to the core systems and attempt to establish a defensive perimeter. Negative, Chen replied. We're going to stay here and fight them. Admiral, Korath said carefully, I don't think you understand the odds we're facing. 20,000 ships against what's left of our combined fleets. It would be suicide. Chen's expression became something that Zethkar would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't madness exactly, though there was certainly an element of that. It wasn't desperation, though that was present too. It was something far more dangerous than either of those things. It was hope. Admiral, she said, we've been monitoring hegemony communications during the battle. Want to know what we learned? What? They're scared, Chen said simply. For the first time since this war began, the hegemony is afraid. They've never encountered tactics they couldn't predict or counter. They've never faced an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything for victory. They're used to fighting rational opponents who can be intimidated or negotiated with. She paused, and her smile widened to show those sharp white teeth again. They've never fought humans before. As the transmission ended, Zethkar realized that everything was about to change. The humans weren't just offering to help with the war. They were planning to win it. And suddenly, for the first time since the hegemony had appeared, Zethkar found himself believing that victory might actually be possible. The 48 hours that followed the first human victory became known throughout the galaxy as the Preparation. Zethkar watched with growing fascination as Admiral Chen transformed the Arcturus system into something that defied every convention of defensive warfare. Instead of establishing traditional defensive perimeters or fortified positions, the humans were doing something unprecedented. They were turning the entire star system into a weapon. Explain to me again what they're doing, Admiral Korath requested during one of the hourly tactical briefings. The Coalition command staff had gathered in the briefing chamber, where holographic displays showed the human preparations in bewildering detail. Admiral Chen appeared on the main screen, her injuries from the previous battle now bandaged but her eyes still carrying that disturbing intensity. We're implementing what human military doctrine calls total warfare, she explained. Instead of meeting the enemy in a conventional battle, we're going to force them to fight us on our terms. Which means what exactly? Asked Sub-Admiral Vexhai, her form materializing from the shadows with obvious agitation. It means we're going to turn their greatest strength against them, Chen replied. The hegemony's advantage comes from their ability to coordinate massive fleets with perfect precision. So we're going to make coordination impossible. The displays updated to show what the humans had been doing throughout the system. They had deployed thousands of small devices that Zethkar initially thought were mines or defensive satellites. But the energy signatures were all wrong for weapons. Quantum scramblers, Chen continued. They create localized space-time distortions that interfere with faster-than-light communication and sensor systems. When the hegemony fleet arrives, they won't be able to coordinate their movements or share tactical information in real time. General Thopvar's massive bioform shifted as he processed this information. You're creating artificial sensor shadows across an entire star system. The energy requirements alone should be impossible for a fleet of your size. Chen's smile returned, and Zethkar was beginning to recognize it as a sign that the humans were about to do something particularly insane. We're not powering them with our ships. We're using the star itself. The implications of this statement sent ripples of shock through the assembled commanders. Zethkar felt his skin plates cycle through several colors as he tried to comprehend what he was hearing. "You've tapped directly into the stellar core?" asked Admiral Seklon, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not tapped," Chen corrected. "We've created a quantum resonance cascade that allows us to channel stellar energy through our scrambler network. The star is essentially providing unlimited power for our defensive systems." Commander Helix leaned forward in his environmental suit.
That's impossible. The engineering challenges alone would take decades to solve, and the risk of destabilizing the star itself would be unacceptable.
"Which is exactly why it works," Chen replied. "The hegemony will never expect us to attempt something this dangerous. They think like you do, logically, cautiously, with proper concern for self-preservation. They can't predict our actions because they can't understand our motivations." Zethkar was beginning to understand something fundamental about human psychology. They didn't just accept risk, they embraced it. Where other species saw dangerous variables to be minimized, humans saw opportunities to be exploited. "There's more," Chen continued. "We've been analyzing hegemony ship configurations and tactical doctrines. Their vessels are designed for coordinated fleet actions. Individual ships have minimal independent operational capability. If we can disrupt their coordination, their effectiveness will drop exponentially." "And how do you plan to disrupt 20,000 ships?" Korath asked. Chen's expression became something that Zethkar had never seen before, a combination of anticipation, determination, and what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. "We're going to board them." The briefing chamber erupted in confused voices from multiple species, all trying to express their disbelief simultaneously. Zethkar's own voice joined the chaos as he tried to process what he had just heard. "You're planning to conduct boarding actions against 20,000 enemy vessels?" Korath's crystalline features shifted through several configurations of bewilderment. "Admiral, even if such a thing were theoretically possible, the casualty rates would be astronomical." "Actually, our projections suggest acceptable losses," Chen replied, her voice maddeningly calm. "Human infantry is uniquely suited for close-quarters combat in hostile environments. We've been developing boarding tactics specifically for hegemony ship configurations." "This is madness," declared Sub-Admiral Vexai. "No species attempts large-scale boarding actions in fleet combat. The logistical challenges alone make it impossible." "Impossible for species that think in terms of preservation and retreat," Chen agreed. "But humans have certain advantages that make boarding actions feasible. We're physically resilient, psychologically adaptable, and we have a cultural predisposition toward aggressive action in confined spaces." Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the command station. The long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. "The Hegemony main fleet has arrived," announced the sensor technician. "Preliminary count confirms 20,000 vessels, including 47 command dreadnoughts." The tactical display materialized, showing a sight that would have been terrifying under normal circumstances. The Hegemony fleet was emerging from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their dark hulls creating an advancing wall of destruction that stretched across multiple light minutes of space. But something was wrong with their formation. Instead of the perfect geometric patterns that had characterized every previous hegemony engagement, their ships were arriving in slightly offset positions. The quantum scramblers were already interfering with their coordination systems. "All ships to battle stations," Admiral Korath commanded. "Implement defensive formation pattern 12. "Negative." Chen's voice cut across the communications channels. "Coalition ships will remain in reserve. Human forces are engaging immediately." Zethkar watched in fascination as the human fleet, now reinforced by additional ships that had arrived during the preparation period, accelerated toward the massive hegemony force. Instead of maintaining any kind of recognizable formation, the human vessels scattered across 3 dimensions, creating a cloud of individual ships moving on seemingly random vectors. "They're going to be slaughtered," muttered Veltai from her position at the tactical station. But as the engagement began, it became clear that the humans had developed tactics that went beyond anything Zethkar had imagined possible. Individual human ships were engaging multiple hegemony vessels simultaneously, using maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They were micro-jumping through space-time, appearing behind enemy ships for split-second attacks before disappearing again. The quantum scramblers were working exactly as intended. Hegemony ships that should have been coordinating their defensive fire were instead firing on empty space, where the human vessels had been moments before.
The perfect tactical coordination that had made them invincible was reduced to chaos as individual ships struggled to track targets that appeared and disappeared without pattern. Then the boarding actions began. Zethkar watched in amazement as human assault craft launched themselves directly at hegemony vessels with a speed and precision that defied belief. These weren't the careful, methodical boarding actions that civilized species occasionally attempted. These were full-scale infantry assaults conducted at interstellar combat speeds. The assault craft were using the same unpredictable movement patterns as the main fleet, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. When they reached their targets, they didn't dock or attempt to breach airlocks in conventional ways. Instead, they were using what appeared to be controlled explosives to blast holes directly through enemy hull plating.
"They're using their own ships as breaching charges," observed Communications Officer Thiss, her voice filled with disbelief. "The assault craft are ramming through the hull and disgorging troops directly into enemy ship interiors." Through long-range sensors, Zethkar could see what was happening inside the boarded hegemony vessels, and the images would haunt him for the rest of his life. Human soldiers were fighting their way through alien ship corridors with a ferocity that seemed supernatural. They moved through hostile environments wearing armor that appeared to be more mechanical than protective, wielding weapons that fired projectiles instead of energy beams. But it wasn't just their equipment that made them effective. It was their approach to combat itself. Where other species fought to achieve tactical objectives while minimizing casualties, humans fought to win regardless of cost. They advanced into enemy fire without hesitation. They continued fighting even after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate most other species. They used their own bodies as weapons when their equipment failed. "Look at this," Veltai called out, directing Zethkar's attention to a specific sensor reading. "The humans are targeting hegemony command structures. They're not trying to destroy the ships, they're trying to capture them." She was right. The boarding parties were fighting their way to the command centers of enemy vessels, overwhelming the crews and taking control of the ships themselves. Within minutes of successful boarding actions, hegemony vessels were turning their weapons on their own fleet. "Impossible," breathed Admiral Seklon. "No species can adapt to alien ship interfaces that quickly." "Unless they're not adapting," Zethkar realized. "Look at the energy signatures from the captured ships. The humans aren't learning to use hegemony technology. They're replacing it with their own." It was true. The captured vessels were being retrofitted with human technology at impossible speeds. Teams of human engineers were somehow installing their own systems into alien ships while combat raged around them. Within hours, captured hegemony vessels were operating with human tactical doctrines and human coordination systems. The battle continued for 18 hours, and by the end of it, something unprecedented in galactic history had occurred. The hegemony main fleet, 20,000 vessels that had been considered unstoppable, had been not just defeated but absorbed. Over half their ships had been captured and were now operating under human command. The rest had been either destroyed or had fled the system in complete disarray. As the last enemy vessels disappeared into faster-than-light travel, Zethkar found himself staring at tactical displays that showed thousands of former hegemony ships now broadcasting human identification codes. "Admiral Chen!" Korath's voice carried tones of amazement and bewilderment. "Your forces have achieved something that every military strategist would have considered impossible. How do you explain this victory?" Chen appeared on the main screen again, and Zethkar was struck by how normal she looked. There was no visible arrogance or superiority in her expression, just the same calm intensity she had shown throughout the conflict. "Admiral, we didn't win this battle through superior technology or tactical brilliance," she said. "We won it by doing something that no other species has ever attempted in galactic history." "Which was?" "We fought for something bigger than ourselves," Chen replied simply. "Every coalition species has been fighting this war to preserve their own civilizations, protect their own territories, maintain their own way of life. Those are rational motivations, and they lead to rational tactics that can be predicted and countered." She paused, and her expression became something that Zethkar was only beginning to understand. Humans fight for the idea that all sentient life deserves the chance to exist and grow and become something better than what it was. We're not fighting to preserve the status quo. We're fighting to create a universe where every species can reach its full potential without fear. The implications of this statement rippled through the assembled commanders like a shockwave. Zethkar felt his skin plate shift to colors he had never experienced before as he processed what he was hearing. "You're saying that humans are willing to risk extinction to protect species you've never met, for civilizations you have no connection to?" asked General Thokvar. Not willing, Chen corrected. Compelled. It's not a choice for us, Admiral. When we see innocence threatened by tyranny, we don't calculate the odds or weigh the costs. We act. It's who we are. Commander Helix activated his environmental suit's communication systems. But that's irrational. No species can survive long-term with such disregard for self-preservation. Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried something that Zethka finally recognized. It wasn't threat or anticipation or predatory satisfaction. It was hope. Commander, that's where you're wrong, she said. What you call disregard for self-preservation, we call the ultimate form of self-preservation. By fighting for the freedom and safety of all species, we ensure that the universe becomes a place where humanity can thrive alongside everyone else.
The transmission paused as Chen consulted something off-screen.
When she returned, her expression had become more serious. Admiral Korath, our intelligence services have been analyzing captured hegemony data cores. We've learned something about their origins and motivations that changes everything. What have you discovered?
The hegemony isn't a separate species, Chen revealed.
They're a collection of conquered civilizations that have been assimilated into a collective consciousness. Every ship we captured contained beings from dozens of different species, all operating under centralized control. The briefing chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications of this revelation sank in. The enemy they had been fighting wasn't an alien invasion. It was a form of technological slavery that turned conquered species into weapons against their own kind. The good news, Chen continued, is that the assimilation process is reversible. We've already begun freeing captured personnel from hegemony control systems. Many of them are species we've never encountered before. Civilizations that were conquered before they could make contact with the Coalition. Zethkar realized that the scope of what was happening had expanded beyond anything they had imagined. This wasn't just a war for survival. It was a liberation campaign on a galactic scale. What do you need from the Coalition? Korath asked. We need every ship you can spare and every warrior willing to fight, Chen replied. Our analysis of hegemony data suggests there are thousands of conquered worlds throughout the galaxy, with billions of assimilated beings who can be freed. This war isn't over. It's just beginning. But it's a war we can win, she added, and her expression carried that devastating combination of determination and hope that Zethkar was learning to associate with humanity. Because now we know what we're really fighting for. Not just the preservation of our own civilizations, but the liberation of every sentient being in the galaxy. As the transmission ended and the Coalition commanders began planning their next moves, Zethkar found himself thinking about what he had witnessed. The humans had done more than achieve a military victory. They had fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict itself. Where other species saw an enemy to be defeated, humans saw prisoners to be liberated. Where others calculated acceptable losses, humans saw lives worth saving at any cost. Where others fought to preserve what they had, humans fought to create something better. He thought about Admiral Chen's smile, and he finally understood what made it so disturbing to non-human observers. It wasn't the expression of a predator or a madman or even a warrior. It was the expression of someone who genuinely believed that a better universe was possible and who was willing to sacrifice everything to make it real. For the first time since the war began, Zethkar felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. And as he watched human ships beginning to coordinate with Coalition forces for the liberation campaigns that would follow, he realized why the universe feared humanity. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than other species, because when humans charged into battle, they carried with them the most dangerous force in the universe, the absolute certainty that tomorrow could be better than today, and that any sacrifice was worthwhile to make it so. The galaxy would never be the same. I witnessed humans charging into battle, then I understood why the universe fears them. HFY.